David. Good morning, and greetings, and praise the Lord to our Christendom community. We're so grateful that you have joined us on today for the Lady D's Health and Wellness Center US, and we're live. And we're so grateful that you tuned in. I have an outstanding guest that I'd like to introduce. He's been with us before and on a different topic, but today we're going to be dealing with um, breaking through the chains of addiction. And as you know, addiction comes in many forms, on many levels. And I'd like to introduce to some and present to others Dr. David White. May God bless you, Dr. White. Thank you so much for coming on.
Hey, good morning. Praise the Lord, everybody. I'm glad to be back. Tell you a little bit about who I am and how I got to be in this particular field. So, I am a licensed substance abuse counselor in Massachusetts and in Georgia. I have a doctorate in psychology and decided to specifically focus on what addiction is doing to our families and to our individuals, particularly in our minority communities. Uh, when addiction hits minority communities and devastates them, the country as a whole looks at it as we have a problem. When it is on the other foot, it is a public health disaster, and resources are put in place to begin to address that public health disaster in a different level, because when it's in our community, it's a crime, and people start getting lots of folks being sent to jail, families are being broken up, children are growing up without mothers and fathers. And so this whole issue of addiction is huge. And the other thing that I work along with, one of the gurus in addiction medicine, Gabor Mate, he has a saying that's so true. He says, not all people who are traumatized are addicts, but you cannot be traumatized, or you cannot be an addict and not experience trauma. And so I then went out and became certified to treat folks who are suffering from trauma in all aspects. So I work primarily with substance abuse, with trauma, anger, and anxiety, all of which are related in some way to trauma and addiction. So that's where I come from. That's what I do. I've been working in the helping professions for just about 50 years, and I love what I do. So even after I retired, I came back and I'm working part time so that I can keep my mind sharp and continue to do the work I love. So that's who I am. So if we could go ahead and get started. If we throw up the first slide there, breaking the chains of addiction. And as I go through, the first thing I'm going to do is give you a snapshot of what's happening with addiction in America. So if you would switch, okay, thank you. And go down to, I think it's about page 5, right there. Okay, so what you see here is the National Survey of Drug Use and Health. And they do this every year, but it's such a massive survey that it generally takes a year or two before they compile all the results and get it out to the public. So this data is from 2021, and it's showing us that at the end of 2021, and what's interesting about this, they do the survey for folks from 12 years of age and up. So when you look at this, you're looking at a large portion of underage individuals who are either using drugs or are mentally ill in some capacity in the United States. So at the end of when they did the 2021 survey, what it shows you here is this one is for cigarette smoking. And it lets us know about 1 in 7 individuals in the United States are still smoking, some 30 years after they told folks that cigarette smoking causes cancer. And about what's interesting is folks started using vaping devices, thinking that it would be better for them. But the nicotine is still, it is probably the most addictive drug that we have. And when you try to get off of nicotine, it's one of the most difficult things to do. Next slide. Okay, so about half of the people in the United States, ages 12 and over, reported drinking in the 30 days before they did this survey. And if you look closely at this, it's over on the right-hand side. It shows you that of that half, about 15% of youngsters in the United States between 12 and 20 are using alcohol regularly. Next slide. Okay, illicit drug use. Primarily, they look a lot at what's happening with marijuana. So in the past year, 61.9 million people, 22% of the folks they surveyed said that they had used marijuana in the past year. And when you look back at the overall 70 million individuals, that is 1 in 4, used illicit drugs in the past year. So the reason I'm giving you this data, the way that they select the sample, it is likely that some of the people that are in your church might have taken this survey or would have been susceptible to being a subject in this particular survey. So it's saying 1 in 4. So think about this, that if you have a church of 100 people, it's likely that 25 of them have used illicit drugs in the past year. And I don't think that the church really pays that much attention to it. But those folks are in your congregation right now. And we need to begin to understand what is it that substance abuse does? How does it impact the individual? What's the mechanism by which it works? So I'm going to get into that in a little bit. Next slide. Okay, so when we look at stimulant drugs, those are the ones that make your nervous system more active. So you feel happier, you're more energetic when you're using these kinds of drugs. 5.3 million people use cocaine. 4.3 million people misuse prescription stimulants. 2.7 million people use meth. So when you look at it overall, there are 10 million people in the United States who are regularly involved in using stimulant drugs on a regular basis. Next slide. Opioid misuse. Now, opioid is the big deal these days, going back to around 2006, 2007. Not going to give you the whole history, but Purdue Pharma released a drug called OxyContin. And OxyContin is a time-released opiate. So it's like, what did we used to call that thing? The capsules come in it was 12-hour release that we used to use for headaches and aspirins and stuff. I forget the name of the drug, but OxyContin mimics that process. So you're not getting the whole hit at one time, but over the course of the day, you're continuing to get this release into your system of this drug OxyContin. And these kinds of drugs are depressants. They bring your body down. The danger, for example, with using heroin and any opioid is it starts to slow your body down and your respiration. So the danger is that you'll go down so low that you no longer can breathe. And of course, if you don't breathe, you're going to die. So the danger of using opioids is it impacts your respiratory system to such an extent that it slows it down to the point to where you can die. Next slide. Oh, before you go back 1 second. I want to point out at the bottom of this, you see fentanyl. Fentanyl is an incredibly dangerous drug. It's over 100 times more powerful than what you get from the opium plant. And the problem that we're having with that drug right now is it's the stuff that's illegally manufactured. When they use it medicinally, they kind of have a handle on it because they know exactly how much of the drug is in the dosage that they're giving. But when you go to the illegally manufactured fentanyl, from one day to the next, you don't know how much potency is in the batch that you get. So you think you get a batch and you can use, let's say for the sake of argument, you can use a 0.5 gram, and that 0.5 gram gets you high. You go tomorrow and you buy from the same person, and that 0.5 gram now is more potent, or that batch is more potent. So you take the same amount as you thought was the 0.5 gram, and it's a full gram, and it's killing people left and right because the control methods for illegally manufactured fentanyl is there's no high control over it. So people are dying left and right from fentanyl. It's the most dangerous opioid that's out there today. Next slide. Okay, substance use disorder. There are criteria. There's 11 criteria that you look at to see if a person has a problem with alcohol or drug use. And one of the things that strikes me, and when I read through the categories, the one that always strikes me, one of the things is it says that the person continues to use the substance regardless of consequences. So you understand that if you're using this drug, that you get yourself into trouble, you get into jail, you get into difficulties with your family, but you continue to do it even though you know that it's going to be a problem. And that's one of the criteria that's in there. And that's the one that always strikes me, that the people who are doing this know that they're going to get themselves into difficulty, but they continue to use anyway. And then the question is, so why is that going on? What's happening with these individuals? And we will come to that shortly. Next slide. Severity levels shows you that more than 1 in 6 people have a serious problem with substance use. So back in the day when we were doing diagnostic procedures, it was either yes or no. Either you were an addict or you were not an addict. And by some magical number, they hit this cutoff point, and by magic, if you're on one side of it, you're not addicted. If you're on the other side of it, you are. But back in 2013, when they released the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual version number 5, they switched from an either or categorization of mental health to a continuum. So lots of times people will read these symptoms and they say, well, I have some of that. Well, I have some of that, and start to question themselves. So all of what the continuum is saying is that all people are likely to have some level of difficulty, but it's not until you get to the point where it starts to impact your activities of daily living that you start to be concerned about whether the person is too mentally ill or too substance addicted to be able to continue their existence without support. So it's now looking at it as a continuum of things rather than either or. Next slide. I'm going to skip that because I'm not going to do anything with mental illness. Just keep going. This one here, suicide, go back 1 second, suicidal thoughts and behavior. Suicidality is one of the big things that people are facing today, especially with young people. This is the one for adults. The one for young folks are coming along. So let's move on to that one. We were looking at suicidal behavior among young people. Next slide. Keep going. Next one. Okay, this is the one that I want to focus on. So in our churches and in our schools, We have young people who have had serious thoughts of suicide. 1 in 8 adolescents between the ages of 12 and 17 have seriously considered killing themselves in the past year. And that's the thing that people should be really concerned about. And one of the major difficulties with this is when you find someone who says that they're suicidal, most individual will get scared and not want to talk about it. But that's the wrong approach. If a person is telling you they're suicidal, you want to dig into, so what is it? And some of the things that you will notice about when people are having those things, even if they're not telling you, they start to give away their most prized possessions. They start to withdraw from the friends that they've been around for a long time. They start to isolate themselves. And so even if the child is not telling you this, if you're noticing those kinds of behavior in adolescence, you might want to just have a conversation with them about what's going on. And hopefully, if they trust you enough, they will tell you, they'll say things like, life is so difficult. I don't know if I want to be around here anymore. And that's your cue to really begin to look at, if a person is having suicidal ideation, it's not a danger until they start developing a plan and a methodology for how they're going to carry it out. So you want to be in the position to begin to dig at them to find out, so if you were going to kill yourself, how would you do that? What would be the method that you would use? So once you start to get that information and you see they have a plan in place and they have a method in place, now you need to be concerned and try and get them some help. But if you don't have that conversation and they're just saying they have suicidal ideation and you get scared and don't pursue it, then you have lost the opportunity, and maybe that youngster goes out and actually does something because they're already well into the process of planning and execution. Next slide. Okay, I think that's as much as I want to do on here. Let's switch to the PowerPoint. Thank you. Next. So what is addiction? So we're going to look at the history of drug use. We're going to look at how people perceive addiction, and we're going to look at behavioral versus process addictions. Next. So current use, we have already pretty much gone through this in the infographics I just did, so I'm going to skip right over that one. This one as well, we just did a little bit on that. Okay, so here's the definition in use about what addiction is. It is an intense attachment to or dependence on any substance, idea, thing, or person that avoids reality and is pursued in spite of the consequences. This is the one that always grabs me. You go after it regardless of what's going to happen. And so some of the times that I work with returning citizens, they'll tell me that they're on probation and that if they get caught using, if they get a dirty urine, they're going right back inside. And the recidivism rate right now is well over 50%. So even though they know what's going to happen to them, for some reason, the addiction has them in such a way that they simply are unable to stop. Next slide. Okay, so there are two ways that people approach thinking about addiction. One approach is that it's a choice, that addiction cannot be a disease because it's a behavior, and all behaviors are the result of choices. Addicts can quit at any time. All you have to do is motivate them to make the right choice. And there's lots and lots of people who believe that particular argument. So a person that's addicted, so when they go into this mode of reference, they start making attributions about the character of the person. So if they're not doing it, they're weak-minded, or they're weak-willed, or there's something the matter with them. Because if it's a choice, all you have to do is make the choice. If you're not making the choice, there's something wrong with you. Okay, now the disease model, there is a defect in an organ. Behaviors and symptoms are the result of this defect and dysfunction. Excuse me. So they treat the symptoms of the disease. This is what's called managed cure. So people who are on methadone maintenance programs for opioids. This is the model that says, okay, you have a disease. There's something wrong with you, and therefore, because it's a disease, we should treat the disease, and that's how we manage it. Next slide. Okay, so there's three things that we need to look at as we begin to move into the process of addiction. There is substance abuse versus addiction versus dependence. So substance abuse basically says that the person is using more than they want to. So they're at social situations, they're at parties, and they're using more than what social norm says is okay. So if you go to a party and you take a drink or two, or nowadays you hit a couple of tokes on weed, it's not a problem, but you are using more than what normal people do. So that's what they call abuse. And abuse is the first sign that something might be going on that you need to pay attention to. Then you move from abuse into addiction, and it refers to a syndrome. Syndrome is a combination of behaviors that you see. So you might start to see the person not taking care of their responsibilities the way that they should, that they are being irritable more often than they normally are. And so you begin to notice combinations of behaviors that's unlike the person, and that is characterized by an overwhelming need to obtain and use the substance. So when you are in substance use abuse, you might only use if your friends around and they give you some of this whatever they are using, and you're good with that. So you don't go out and buy it, you don't go look for it, you don't do any of those things, but you are using this substance more than expected. When you get into addiction, it basically starts to consume your life, that you're either high, looking to get high, or preparing to get high. So all day long, your mind, your behavior is consumed with finding your drug of choice. And that means you got to go find your dealer wherever your dealer is. If you don't have money, you have to go get the money, and that often involves you doing things that causes you problems in your family. So it's not uncommon for you to go and take money from members of your family, to lie to people in your family, and take possessions, things like jewelry and money and stuff, and go pawn them. So you first have to get hold of the money. So that's the first step. Now, once you get hold of the money, you got to go and find your dealer wherever they are, and that takes time. And then now when you come back, you have to prepare the drug, and then you go ahead and you get high, and you go through the high, and you come down, and the process starts over again. Where am I going to find the money for the next high? So that's a person who is in full-blown addiction. Now, what happens with addiction is that you become dependent on the substance, and dependence is a physiological thing. So let's say you start off, and let's talk about marijuana. And when you start smoking marijuana, it takes you one joint to get high. After a time, you find that smoking one joint doesn't get you the same level of high that it used to. So now you have to go and get more to have the same impact on your nervous system. And you keep upping it so that you can feel the impact on your nervous system. In fact, one of the things that I have heard people tell me, I had a very good friend, and he told me, I said, how could you end up in this state? He says, you don't understand. I said, you're right. That's why I'm asking you. How'd you end up here? And he says, this was on crack. And he's told me, he says, when he took the first hit of that crack pipe, it was like, it was better than any experience he'd ever had in his life. And from then on, this is what they call chasing the high, chasing the dragon. From that moment on, every time he get high, he was looking to recapture that feeling from the first time. And you can't ever get it back. But in his mind, he's figuring that at some point, I'm going to get a batch that's going to give me that same feeling I had before. And he just keeps going and going. And now he's fully dependent on the substance. And abstinence from the substance generates symptoms of withdrawal. And symptoms of withdrawal are both physiological as well as psychological. And what we discover for a lot of substances, that the psychological addiction or the psychological withdrawal is a much bigger deal than physical. You can put somebody in detox and have them physically clean from whatever the substance is within 5 to 7 days. But now their mind is still telling them that they want to try and get back to that same feeling that they had when they were high, or that there was some issue in their life that they're trying to escape. And we didn't deal with that when we put them in detox. So now they're facing those things over again, and they want to go back and escape from the pain. Next slide. So here's the addiction process. It starts off with experimentation, social use. A couple of times a month. The source is usually friends and peers. Primarily may use so it's alcohol. They get into the parents' alcohol cabinet and they're drinking from there. But you're just trying to feel out what this stuff is about. You hear that you shouldn't use alcohol, you shouldn't use marijuana, and as with all as the young people, their minds are curious, so they're going to try and figure out what's the big deal. Why can't I do this? And they're doing it every now and then. So it's that's how folks start off. And back in when I was a young man, that process would be beginning sometime in high school. In today's culture, that process is beginning late in elementary school. So you have fifth graders who are experimenting with drugs, and they get into middle school. And by middle school, you have people who are full-blown addicted. So there's something that's happened in our culture that has caused folks to move to lower and lower age levels of experimenting with drugs. And when I come to another part, I'm going to talk about what are some of those things that's happening in our culture. Then the abuse stage is regular use several times per week. So when I do certain evaluations, I ask the persons, I said, so are you a regular user? And say, well, what do you mean by regular? I said, so are you using any substance 3 or more times a week for a period of about 6 months or more? If a person is in that state, they are addicted. So it's regular usage is not that you have one drink a week or one drink a day. If you're having several drinks a week, or you're having several episodes of using a substance a week, and that persists for 6 months or more, then you can consider yourself to be addicted. And then stage 3 is dependency, daily continuous use, and a physiological dependence on the substance. Next slide. Withdrawal. Common withdrawal symptoms include nervousness, sleep disturbances, mood swings, changes in activities of daily living. So when the person stops using the system, using the drug, you will notice some of these things happening with them. And at this point, they're one of the things that's mood swings. One of the big mood swings is irritability, anger, explosive outbursts, frustration. So the mood swings is probably one of the first things that you're going to notice. And then the next thing that you might notice is that this person is no longer functioning as they should from a day-to-day basis. So instead of getting up and going to work, they'll stay in bed. Instead of going to school, they'll go get to school and they'll fall asleep in school. They'll be so tired from using the substances that it's impacting them in various areas of their life every day. And so if you're paying attention, you should be able to start to see the impact of substance use on your loved ones and people that you're around all the time. The symptoms of primary withdrawal are often the opposite of the direct effects of the substance itself. So if you're using a drug that's a stimulant, when you start to withdraw, instead of feeling elevated and energized, the person's going to be feeling depressed and down. And that's not uncommon. So if they stop using the substance, you have an opposite reaction in their body to what they normally have when they're on the substance. Symptoms occur if the substance is again introduced. So this is one of the reasons why folks go right back to using. They're feeling this uncomfortable stuff in their system. They don't want to feel this uncomfort, so they go right back to using. As soon as they start using, all of those symptoms go away. Next slide. Okay, so pharmaceutical classifications of drugs. You have alcohol, which includes beer, wine, and liquor. Cannabis is marijuana and hashish. Tranquilizers, benzodiazepines such as Equinel, Librium, Miltown, and Valium. Sedative hypnotics, barbiturates such as ammobarbital, butabarbital, phenobarbital, and secobarbital. To talk a little bit about that category of drugs. And so when you look at it, what's the difference between a tranquilizer and a sedative hypnotic? Tranquilizers impact your mood. So it often, time when I've known this to be used most often is when people have somebody who dies and their grief is overpowering them. You'll give them a tranquilizer to keep them in a calm state. Sedative hypnotics actually work on your physiology. Sedative hypnotics are often used as anesthesias to put people under for operations because it's physically changing what's happening in your body. And this is one of the categories of drugs that if people are addicted to this, you probably want them to be supervised when they're coming through withdrawal, just like alcohol. You don't want to necessarily have people detox from alcohol without proper supervision because they can die. The same thing with sedative hypnotics. When you're coming down from sedative hypnotics, if you're not properly monitored, you can die during withdrawal. Then you have hallucinogens, LSD, mescaline, peyote, PCP, which is also known as angel dust. Then you have narcotics. That's your heroin, methadone, and opium category. So anything that's an opioid fits under the heading of narcotics. Stimulants, amphetamines, coke, MDMA, ecstasy, all of those things fit under stimulants. And then they have solvents. And believe it or not, people do things like they inhale glue, gasoline. They have aerosol sprays that they spray into a bag and start to sniff it. And all of those things will make people high. So that's your general categorization of the drugs that, according to the Federal Drug Administration. Next slide, please. Codependency. This shows up when members of the family know that somebody is addicted and they become preoccupied with the person's problem, conduct, and communication. So once you're in a family and you notice that something is going on with a family member, and that something that's going on with them takes up a lot of the family energy, because now you're trying to figure out what's going on with this person and so forth. And then you have those people develop feelings of guilt when they're unable to meet the person's needs. They feel self-blame because they're not meeting the needs of the family member, not stepping back to realize that this individual is doing what they're doing it, not you. And as guilty as you feel. And then it goes to putting up the veil of secrecy. One of the reasons why people don't often get help and recover from substance abuse is once there's a member of the family who becomes addicted, the family goes into a place of secrecy. We don't want anybody outside the family to know what's going on with this person. So don't tell anybody what's going on. Don't share what's happening in the family with other folks. And so that veil of secrecy then comes down over the family, and the family starts to respond entirely based on keeping this individual's problem out of public eye. And so that's how the codependency starts to develop, because you're going to, if the person needs drugs, you're not going to want them to go out and steal something to get the drugs. So you are now preoccupied with making sure that you provide this person with what they need so that the family does not experience shame. And of course, we all know that that's a disaster. So codependency, while it is a understandable process, is not a process that's going to help the individual in the way that they need to be helped. One of the very first things that must be done when you're working with folks who are under any form of addiction is you have to have them admit that they have a problem. If they don't get to the place of admitting that they have the problem, there's nothing that you can do that will change their behavior, because of course we know you can't change another person's behavior. You can want them to all day long, but until they get to the place where they are convicted that they need to change what they're doing, they're going to continue to do it and to continue to suffer. Next slide. So let's look at what happens in the family, the typical roles that happens in the family. The addict. The role is acted out by a member of the family who has an addiction. It involves deception and other negative behaviors to cover the addiction. An important goal is to make it appear as if other family members have a problem. So it's not me, nothing wrong with me, it's you. There's something wrong with you. Rather than the addiction being a problem. So they don't want to admit or accept responsibility for how they're disrupting the family and disrupting their lives. They're starting to lack meaningful connection to family. They start to pull back. The deepest connection is to the addiction. So what's important to them at this point is that they're continuing to get their fix. They're continuing to get their drugs. And so the relationships that they have in the family start to not be as important, and they start to pull back from the family and then say that you all are pushing me out. The addict is often oblivious to the negative family consequences of the addiction, but they're not thinking clearly. They're not thinking straight. So what's going on is the addiction has grabbed them to the point to where that's all they're thinking about. Next slide. The enabler in the family. This is the role of the person assumed. This role is often assumed by a spouse if the person is the parent, a sibling, or even a friend who is deeply invested in trying to help the addict. So the enabler is saying that I'm going to do what I can to try and make sure that you are not suffering. So they will provide the addict with resources. They'll come and they'll ask for money, or I need to go do so-and-so. Now, you know full well that what they're going to do with that money is to go get high. But you overlook that and you give them the money, and you're enabling that negative behavior and causing more damage to the individual. Then the enabler may eventually be aware of the severity of the problem, but may deeply desire to avoid conflict and contention. So there are individuals in the world who, when they're faced with conflict, they want it to go away. So they don't confront the conflict. They end up pulling back and saying, you know what, I'm just going to let you do what you want because I don't want to deal with this. And that's exactly what the addict wants you to do. They want you to just let them do what they're doing, continue to support them in what they're doing and not challenge them on what they're doing. The enabler capitulates and helps the addict obtain substances or other resources that perpetuate and make the addiction worse. The enabler often tries to keep the family in balance, even while blocking out the real issue of addiction. So they're trying to manage things, but not acknowledge that the reason that the family's in chaos is because there's an addict in the house. Next slide. The scapegoat. The scapegoat is the member of the family who makes trouble and grabs the attention and acts out to compete for the attention of the addict. So when you're in this situation as a member of the family, siblings, you notice that this person is getting all the attention, all of the focus is on them, and we are being ignored. And so when they try to assert their independence, when they try to assert the fact that this is what's going on, the family turns on them and says, you're causing problems. You need to stop doing that because you are messing up the family. So they're now covering for the addict, and the person who rightfully is perceiving that the family needs to be brought in order, they get labeled as the problem. Next slide. Now, the hero in the family is the person who tries to counterbalance the scapegoat. So they do positive things. They try to do things that will make the family proud of them rather than the shame that they're under and the tyranny of the addict that's running rampant in the house. And so that child, especially in families, it is normally the older sibling that is the hero. They're trying to keep everybody in line. They're trying to let folks know that there is still good in the family, that people in the family can still achieve, and they're the ones that folks out in the community will say, oh, look at that wonderful son or that wonderful daughter. Look, isn't that a great person? And in the meantime, the family is in total chaos, but this child is trying to hold up their end so that the family is not in disarray and shame. Next slide. The mascot. This is the person who brings humor to the family, that rather than engaging in scapegoating or trying to be the hero in the family, they're the ones that will use humor to bring people to peace. So this individual, usually somebody that's in the middle of the hierarchy of the hierarchy of siblings, and they're the ones that will do the things that will bring the family to some peace, bring the family some joy, and that's what they do. Is their job is to bring peace and joy and happiness to the family in the face of this addictive behavior. Next slide. Then the lost child. People, siblings and families that are addicted, usually the youngest child, if they're not the addict, will feel the neglect the most. They will feel the most at a loss, especially if when they came along, there was no addiction in the family, and they're trying to figure out now, why is the family so different? And in all the chaos and hubbub of what's happening in the family, that child ends up being neglected more than they should be, and they experience that, and so they get labeled as a lost child. Next slide. Okay, so let's take a look at what is actually happening in addiction. When you go back to whether addiction is a choice or a disease, and whether or not people can stop what they're doing or not. What you have here is what's called the reward pathway in the brain. This is where when you do something positive, you get joy from doing it. And because you get reinforced for doing this positive thing, it starts to become a part of your behavior. There are three parts of the brain that's involved in this. The ventral tegmental area, the nucleus accumbens, and the prefrontal cortex. So you do something pleasurable, and your brain stem says, okay, this is not dangerous. Emotions say, yeah, I like this. And then your frontal cortex, where you do your thinking, says, yeah, let's register this. This is good. Let's do this again. So think about that now when persons are using drugs. So you take the drug for the first time and you don't see anything dangerous, so it doesn't activate a threat response. The next thing that happens is, oh yeah, this feels really good. And then the brain and your memory centers in your frontal cortex say, yeah, let's do this, because, and what's happening is dopamine is being released. Dopamine is the pleasure hormone, is being released into your body when you're doing this, okay? So as you're doing that, and the dopamine is being released, you start to form a stimulus response bond that this thing is okay, this thing is good, I like it, okay? Then what begins to happen now is, if you start to notice that you're becoming addicted and you start to stop using or cut back on the substance, the ventral tegmental area, which is where your threat response is, says, oh, this doesn't feel good. This is not okay. And your emotions are saying, no, this doesn't feel right. I'm feeling depressed. I'm feeling sad. I'm feeling whatever I'm feeling. And now your frontal cortex says, let's cut back on this, because we're noticing that there's a change. But if you continue to use the substance, what eventually happens is the signals stop going up to your prefrontal cortex. You're no longer experiencing an actual choice about what you're doing, because the emotion and your threat response is so strong that it starts to shut down the functioning in the part of your brain where you make choices. So what addiction does is it hijacks the dopamine system in your brain, so that you're feeling good when you're using the drug, and you're feeling happy when you're using the drug. And when your conscious mind, your thinking process says we need to set back, the part of your brain that says that you are in danger becomes more activated and continues to shut down your ability to think. So Kevin McCarthy, who was an Air Force pilot who became medical doctor, who became addicted, started looking at this process, and he came up with the idea addiction is a disease of choice. And his way of thinking about it is that you don't get to make a choice, because your frontal lobe stops at being activated when you're using the substance. So the more addicted you are, is the less able you are to make a conscious choice. You're reacting to the midbrain and survival brain in your body, and your dopamine system, which brings you reward, has been hijacked. So you're getting pleasure from using this thing, and when you try to stop, it doesn't feel pleasurable, so that part of your brain stops functioning. So when you look at what the reward system does, it gives you reward, it's motivation, it's pleasure, it's euphoric, it's motor, fine motor skills. You do things compulsive, perseverance or perseveration. These are the things that happens in the reward pathway of your brain. So as long as that reward pathway is active and activated because of substance use, then it is not going to be a choice for you to stop, because your reward pathway has been hijacked, and you continue to want to feel good, and you end up doing things that otherwise you would not do when you're fully aware and conscious. Now, the serotonin pathway deals with your mood, okay? your mood, your memory, processing, sleep, and cognition, and so on. So all of the serotonin pathways are also impacted because if you get that, if that becomes dysregulated, then you're going to start to see problems with sleep. You're going to start to see problems with thinking. You're going to have problems with memory, and you're going to have that mood fluctuation that we talked about as a result of withdrawing from the substance. Next slide. I'm not sure I need to go over this, but basically this is how you diagnose a person with substance use disorder. You have these 11 criteria, and if you meet 2 of the 3, you have a mild problem. If you meet 4 of the 5, you have a moderate problem. If you go 6 or more, you have a severe problem. And you can see that they're the categories that you're looking at. So continued use despite negative consequences, unable to carry out major obligations, using drugs in hazardous situations. Next slide, and you can just go down, but basically this is what you have to go through. You have to go through these 11 criteria as you're meeting with the person, and if they meet, as you saw back there, if you meet certain criteria, then you're diagnosed as having a substance use disorder. Craving or a strong desire to use. This is something that is being considered to add as the 12th thing that you look at. And as I said before, craving is probably outside of knowing that it's a problem and continuing to use. Craving is probably the strongest indicator of whether a person is drug addicted or not. Continue. Next slide. Okay, so now we have a person that's in addiction. How do we bring them back from that? The Substance Abuse and Mental Health Service Administration process. This is what recovery is: a process of change through which individuals improve their health and wellness, live a self-directed life, and strive to reach their full potential. Now, there are 4 major dimensions when you start to look at putting a person or talking about a person being in recovery. It's their health, it's their home. Do they have a stable place to live? Do they have purpose or meaning in their daily activities? Do they have a job? Are they going to school? Are they volunteering somewhere? Do they have, are they helping to take care of family members? Are they doing anything creative? And are they independent? Do they have income and resources to participate in society? Now, all of these things that's in there, when you're dealing with poor and disadvantaged folks, 90% of that stuff they don't have. When you're dealing with folks who are returning citizens, they don't have these. And so is it any surprise that folks in poor and disadvantaged communities and returning citizens end up going back to drug use time after time because they don't have the necessary resources available that would help them to stay off? Community relationships are important. So one of the things that we tell folks who are entering into early recovery, people want to jump in and you want to have relationships in your life. But when you're coming out of an addiction, you have enough problems dealing with yourself. So we encourage folks in the first year that they're in addiction not to get involved in intimate relationships, because you're going to have enough trouble figuring you out, and in trying to bring another human being into relationship with you. Those usually end up in disasters. Next slide. So recovery emerges from hope. Now, this is important because when a person is addicted and they're in the throes of that addiction, they don't see any possibility of life being different. So one of the things that we need to do, and the church is a wonderful place to do this if we do it correctly, they need to have hope that their life can be different. So can they imagine a life where they're not suffering the pain and frustration and hurt and anger and all of that from what addiction has done to them? If they cannot imagine a different future, then they stay in that situation. So one of the things that we can start to do as church members and church organizations is to begin to recognize when you have folks who are coming in who might have some difficulty, is give them a sense of hope. And I'm not talking to them about the hope of salvation. Yes, you're going to do that, but you have to also give them hope for their regular life. What is it that is out there for them? What kind of resources can you help connect them to? What kind of direction can you point them in so that they start to imagine a life that can be different than the one they have? And if they start to have hope, they will start to be able to move towards recovery. Let me see, how am I doing for time? Okay, I'm good. Recovery occurs via pathways. So individuals with unique and distinct needs, strengths, preferences, goals, culture, and background include trauma experiences that affect and determine their pathways to recovery. Recovery is built on multiple capacities, strengths, talents, coping abilities, resources, and so on. So one of the things that you want to do is to find out what the person does well. What is something that when the addiction wasn't there, what did they like to do? And is it possible for them to move back towards that in some capacity or the other? And sometimes it may not be possible because the addiction has caused them so much pain and suffering that they cannot face those things that they want to do. It is instead of a pleasure, that thing has now become something that they want to get away from because of of pain and suffering that's associated with how they messed it up. Next slide. So recovery is holistic. And in order to really start to get a person back on the path to right living, it's got to be holistic. And so when we talk about this, and when I do my next presentation and looking at exactly what's required in the church to begin, what are the competencies that you need to develop to start to work with these individuals, we'll get to this holistic ministry. If you are in a church and all you're doing is preaching salvation and not doing anything else, the people in your congregation who are suffering are likely going to continue to suffer. And it's not because they don't believe in God. It's not because God is not real. It's because we have to address the whole human being when we're looking for people to heal from whatever situation they're in, whether it's mental health, whether it's substance abuse, whether it's just life in general. We have to look at the entire person. You have to look at their mind. You have to look at what's happening with their body. You have to look at what's going on in the spirit. You have to look at their community. And as you're looking at all of these aspects of a person's life, and you start to be able to meet the needs in those areas, the person will start to embrace the possibility that life can be different and that they do not have to be addicted, and that they have, more importantly, now watch this, and let me just throw this in as a very important thing. When a person is recovering from any form of illness, and you might even go so far as to talk about physical illnesses, but certainly for mental illness and for any form of addiction, getting a community is crucial. They must have a community of people that is there to support them, not to nag them and stuff, but to genuinely support them as they're striving to change their behavior. Because one of the things that occurs when addicts are trying to change, and this is one of the hardest things I have to work with people who are addicted, they're ready to change. They genuinely say, okay, I'm ready to do this. And they go out and they start doing things that's positive and creative other than what they used to do. And because of their reputation, because of how people see them, they don't notice the changes that these people are making. And they will go and tell them, "Oh, you're still so and so. You're still doing this. You're still doing that," and not noticing the change. And when nobody notices that people are trying to change, they immediately become discouraged and disgusted and say, "What's the use?" and go right back to doing what they were doing. So one of the things I preach to folks when I'm working with them is you have to keep in mind, and this is what one of the first things you got to do. You are not doing this for other people. You're doing this because you want your life to be different. So you have to move them from an external locus of control to I'm doing this to please somebody or someone or the community to I'm doing this because it's important to me. And if it's important to me, I'm going to keep doing it. And as they keep doing it, all of a sudden, one day, somebody's going to say, "You know what? I'm noticing that you're different. There's something different about what you're doing." And now they have the reinforcement, the positive reinforcement to continue down that path. But and if you have folks in your community, please try and notice when they're doing better and let them know that you notice they're doing better. Because even though I tell them it's about the internal locus of control, everybody still likes to know that people notice when they're doing well. Okay. Recovery is supported by peers and allies, going back to community. Recovery is supported through relationship and social networks. So you see all of these things here after they laid out the important things, they're going down and there. Lots of what they're talking about has to do with forming relationships in communities. Next slide. Culturally based and influence. So each culture has norms and standards of behavior that they say this is what you should be like if you are a positive member of this culture. And that includes values, traditions, beliefs, are keys to determining the person's journey. So if you are in a culture that believes in traditions, like you have this big time thing for Thanksgiving, you have this big time thing where you do the turkey and the whole 9 yards. When that person is addicted, they are either not welcome at these family traditions because they cause issues, or they tell themselves not to go because they're going to feel bad being there because people are going to talk about their addiction. People are going to be trying to get them to change. So I start to isolate themselves from family traditions, like Christmases, birthdays, hot celebrations. People start to isolate themselves from those traditions because it's painful for them to be in those situations. So when you're starting to deal with recovery, you want to look at, so how is this person attached to the traditions of the family? If they have disattached themselves or separated themselves, now you're going to want to make a conscious effort to bring them back in. And in doing that, the family members are going to have a conversation about how are we going to bring this person back into the family and not do so. What are the things that that has been done that caused this person to feel uncomfortable? And you say, well, you're kowtowing to this. And no, you're starting to let them know that they're welcome back in the family. Because when they were in full-blown addiction, people destroy families when they're in full-blown addiction. And the family members take that thing to heart. And some of them, you did this thing and you're dead to me. I'm never going to talk to you again. I don't want to see you again. And so that person is walking away with that thought in their head. And if the family does not come and recognize that those things happen and start to put structures in place so that that's not going to be continuing to happen, then when the person shows back up for these family functions, they're going to get hurt and disappear. All right, recovery support is supported by addressing trauma. Like I said, it is impossible to be an addict and not have traumatic experiences. So you need to recognize that and begin to maybe talk to them about, so what are the things that are really hurtful and painful to you that has happened around the family, and how do we begin to fix that? Are you interested in going into counseling for it? How can we help you to continue on the path of your recovery? Next slide. Individual family members, well, basically I've talked about that. Recovery is based on respect. 99.99% of the time, an addict loses the respect of the people that care about him. And you just look at this person and you just like, I have no respect for you. You have lost. There's no way that I want to be around you. I don't trust you anymore. I don't feel good about being around you, and I don't have any respect. And that's a normal response, okay? But you have to now look into your heart and into your mind and into your experience and say, can I find it in my heart to allow some respect to come back to this person from me? And one of the things that might have to happen is you have a conversation. And there might be one particular thing that you want this person to start to do so that they start to regain your respect. And you have that conversation. Listen, if you could just do this for a length of time, you're going to start to rebuild my respect for you. And don't hide it, because if it's there and you don't put it out there, you're going to act it out. It's not going to be hidden for long. And here's the thing, people who are severely traumatized and addicted, they recognize they have a high sensitivity to people being negative about them, because that's a lot of what they get. So they have a high sensitivity to when people aren't being straight with them. And also because they have become masters at not being straight with people, so they can manipulate situations and get what they want. So if you start playing that game with them, they're going to know it. And more than likely, they play it better than you, and they're going to flip the table on you. Okay? So respect, real mutual respect, is important as people start to recover from addiction and for being in tune with what's happening in the family. And the family needs to recognize how they're going to bring that person back on board. Next slide. Treatment recovery. So these are some of the major things that people need to do to get into recovery. Now, there are some things, there are people, and we don't understand why. There are people that's called natural recoverers. So there are people who look at their lives and look at the damage and carnage that has been caused in their lives, and they say, I'm going to stop this. And they just do. From that moment on, they start to do the right thing. They start to stay away from drugs. They start to rebuild their lives, and they do it without going into treatment. They do it without going to counseling. And though there are people who are like that, we call them natural recoverers. But for those who are not natural recoverers, the things that has to happen is back in the day, we used to say complete abstinence. And even to this day, I think many federal programs that are funded by federal money will not allow anything but total abstinence. So if you come for treatment, you can't be using. And if we find that you're using, we're going to throw you out of the program. The other thing that's coming on now is what's called harm reduction. And harm reduction is, let's start figuring out how you can do less harm to yourself and the people around you. And as we set goals for you to meet every month, every 2 months or whatever, you're meeting those goals. Part of that meeting that goal is reducing your use of the drug. And so eventually you get to the place to where they do not need the drug. And if they come in and they have been using, that's an opportunity for a conversation, not an opportunity to say, we're going to throw you out and you're not going to be able to come back anymore. I didn't share this earlier, but let me share this now. Nobody wakes up in the morning or comes into the world deciding or wanting to be an addict. That just doesn't happen. So what is it that causes folks to go down that pathway? When I was a younger clinician, I used to ask the wrong question when people came to see me. I would ask them, what's wrong with you? Because that was the training. If you're coming to see me in my capacity, something's got to be wrong in order for you to be coming to see me. So that was the path I went down. What is wrong with you? So that immediately reinforces to a person who's already doubting themselves that they're broken, they need fixing, something is wrong with them. And so I'm reinforcing the negative aspects of why the society is putting pressure on them and so on. About 10, 12 years ago, I started asking a different question, which should have been the question I asked from the very beginning. What has happened to you in your life that has caused you to not be able to cope with the challenges that you're facing, that you need to come see someone like me? So life happens. And as life is happening to those people and they're getting hurt and they're suffering from the hurt and they're feeling pain, as that stuff continues to build, gets to the point where, you know what, I need somebody to help me sort this out. It's not that you're broken. It's not that something is wrong with you. It's that you need help managing the stresses that's facing you day to day. And that's why you come to see people like me. So so going back to this idea of treatment and recovery, then we go to maintenance. After we get the person off of the substance, we're going to maintaining. Sometimes maintenance is what's called MAT, medicated assistant treatment. So you're using drugs to help the person wean off the drugs, and then you have to wean them off the drug that you're using. So you can't keep them using that. So that's one of the problems with methadone. The methadone treatment program is basically lifetime. That you're substituting methadone or one form of heroin for another form of heroin, and that form that you're replacing allows you to function better. But as long as you are not weaned off of that, you're still it's not to the point where you're addicted and can't function, but you're still dependent upon that substance. And then resilience, and this is a piece that we must, by all means, start to recognize and nurture. Human beings are incredibly resilient. So even when they're in addiction, they are still surviving, they're still resilient. And we have to start to make use of the fact that people bounce back from all kinds of horrible tragedies. That's in them. And so you have to find in that person, where's the resilience? How do I build that person's capacity to bounce back from whatever it is that faced them? And one of the things that you do is, one of my tactics is to say, look back at your life. And after all of the things that you've been through, you're still sitting here in front of me. You didn't decide to hurt yourself. You didn't decide to do something that would incapacitate you. You're still in your right mind. Your resilience, and have them begin to notice. Say, yeah, I'm still here, and I'm still sane. I'm still doing okay. I can still think. I still have access to my thought processes. And while they may not be fully functioning the way you want them to, you're functioning well enough to know that you need help. Next slide. Okay. Dealing with the addict. Don't forget this, the 3 C's. You didn't cause the addiction. You cannot control the addiction, and you cannot cure it. And people move into helping people who are addicted forgetting this, that since you didn't cause it, you can't, there's nothing you can do. And the thing is, it brings home to you what you already know. You cannot manage anybody's behavior but your own. And so using these 3 C's brings you right back to that place. You didn't cause it, you can't control it, and you cannot cure it. Next slide. So when you a person is in a recovery, there's a couple of things that happens. There is been in recent years a change in language. So we used to talk about relapse a lot. Now watch this: 70% of the people who go into recovery relapse eventually. 37% happens within the first 12 months. And over the rest of the several years, 70% of people who are in addiction and try to recover for the first time, 70% of those people end up back in treatment and end up back in addiction. Recently, we've been talking about, or the industry has been talking about, something called a lapse instead of a relapse. A relapse is a full-blown going back to searching for the money, hunting down the dealer, buying its drugs, coming home, using, coming down off the high, and starting the process over and over again. And so now you're back in that cycle. A lapse is thought more of, you're hanging out with your friends on the weekend. They're the friends that you used to use, which you shouldn't be around anyway. So you're hanging out with those folks and you end up using. But then you say to yourself, oh no, this is not me. I'm not in this game anymore. And you go back to doing the things that support your recovery. That is not a relapse. That's a lapse. So that's a one-time fall off the wagon kind of thing, and you go right back to supporting your recovery. So making that distinction. So for example, if you were in a program and the program found out that you had used, it would not be unusual for them to sever you from the program when all you needed was somebody to understand, hey, I made a mistake this time. I'm still doing what I need, going to do what I need to do. I made a mistake, and allow them to continue to see if they can get back on track. So a relapse is lax or permissive thinking about the commitments that you make. So when you start your recovery, you make some commitments about how is your life going to be different. What are the goals that you set? And if you are not strong in pursuing those goals, if you are not thinking about those goals and being committed to them, then it's likely that you can go back into a relapse. Actual use only if it's continued. You start, when you go to the experience, you start to relive. You start to what's the word I'm looking for? It's making it a hero. That's not the right thing. I know, and the word is gone from my mind right now. But you relive the experiences of being high and so forth, and you put those experiences up on a pedestal. So you start thinking about, oh man, what I remember the good times. I remember when I was high and I was feeling this way, and you're starting to really get into lifting up that experience. And the more you do that, is now you're going to start to kick back in the craving in your brain. You're going to start to kick back in this idea that I'm going to go. And in the experience, in your drug experience, there are 3 things you want to look out for: people, places, and things. So you want to stay away from the people that you used to get high with. You want to stay away from the places that you used to get high with. And you want to stop doing the things that you used to do when you were high. If you continue to do those things and be around those experiences, it's going to continue to increase the likelihood that you relapse. Help seeking. So you can need to seek help. You need to do things that are preventative, staying away from the people, places, and things. You need to search for your triggers. So there are things that caused you when you were using, particularly if you were using as a form of escape and self-medication. There were things that would come in front of you that would make you want to go back to using those things. You want to search for them. You want to know what they are. So if your trigger, or the thing that triggered you to use drugs, was you always got into these knockdown, drag out arguments with people in your family, and you got to know that that's happening. So when you're going to go visit the family, you want to be aware and you want to remember what are the things that triggered you. So when you see that thing, you're already aware that it's going to come, and you're able to stay calm and not to go to that high place where you become so out of control that you do things that you don't want to do. So one of the things that you want to ask is, so what was being high? What did that do for you? What need did being high meet? So being high meant that I would no longer be suffering from the pain of being neglected in my family. It made it so that I was no longer feeling that nobody cared about me. So whatever that need is that substance did for you, you have to identify it. And it might be more than one. So you have to start, and that's where the counseling comes in. You have to go in so you can be able to explore what's happening, what has happened in your life that has caused you to use this way of escaping or supporting yourself so that you feel good as a human being. So then the next thing is, some of the times people who are addicts, in the old days we used to say you have more excuses than Carters have liver pills. If you are dealing with a person who is coming out of substance abuse, they are going to give you excuses. They are going to give you reasons why it makes sense for them to do it. And you have to expose that. You don't want to crush them. You don't want to have them go into guilt, but you want to really have them question. So is that really what's going on here? Or is something else happening? So you need to be aware of that as a possibility, and make sure you out them without crushing their spirit. Next slide. Okay, so here are some of the places where people can go and get support if you don't know or you don't have resources available to help folks that are in your church or in your family. These are all of the kind of places that's out there. You have AA Boston. You have now the NA.org for substance abuse is really good because they have, it's virtual. And so you can be in meetings with people from any place in the world, all over the world. You have meetings, and you're likely to be in there with people from England, from Australia, and all of these folks all over the world are on the same journey of trying to bring their life back into control, and you get to see it from different cultural perspectives. So I really like that as a resource. Al-Anon, many people already know about that. The Al-Anon is for Alcoholics Anonymous. There's dual recovery. So one of the things that I didn't talk about is it is not uncommon for people who have substance abuse to have what's called co-occurring disorders. So not only are they addicts, but they might also be clinically depressed. They might also be suffering from anxiety. They might also be suffering from PTSD. So there are people who are addicts who have co-occurring disorders, and you got to know that those things are there, and you have to be ready to deal with both aspects of the illness so that the person can get full recovery. There's social organizations for sobriety, SOS, Smart Recovery, the National Recovery, Rational Recovery rather, Moderation Management. These are folks who are high on harm reduction. And there is DBSA, which is dual diagnosis stuff. So if you basically in every state, there is a organization that license substance abuse counselors. If you contact them or go to their website, there is almost always a resource page. So you can go to that resource page and pull up some things and be able to talk to those folks. Because one of the things that you want to be pretty good at is if you're going to refer someone for help, you want to be able to use some of the proper language about what you're looking for. And so going to these resources will help you to understand how to present to the agency that you're going to, whether it's a community agency, whether it's a state agency. If you begin to be able to talk to them about the languaging of what you're bringing this person to help for. And by using some of these resources, some of them actually have scripts of what you can say when you call so that you're bringing these people for help. And that brings me to the end of my presentation. Thank you for listening. Glad that you were here with me today.
Dr. White, I'm just almost speechless. This is just such good information that you have provided, especially within our church community, because there are, quiet as it's kept, but I'm just going to put it out there. There are many of our churches that are and or have experienced individuals to come into their church, and knowing how to minister to them in a more effective way is so important. When you mentioned about holistic, I think you said what I said. It's a process, and those within the church community have to understand it takes time, but it also takes skilled and qualified professionals to be able to minister to various ones. There's various other programs for substance abuse like AA, Al-Anon, and various ones. I can't name them all, but I'm so glad you are qualified to be able to provide the assistance. We have a couple of questions that did come up, and maybe you can give some comment. We think it's Sarah Lee, who was in there, and she mentioned, I'll show that, she mentions we have not only children, but also adults with suicidal tendencies.
Yes.
You've experienced that as well. Can you share just briefly on that?
Well, this is the same, that people get scared. So if I were to say to you, I'm thinking about killing myself, most people immediately get this fear reaction. What do I do? And their natural instinct is to not talk about it, because if I talk about it, I'm going to make you want to do it more. Okay. And that's the opposite process. If you talk about it, you're going to unveil how serious this thing is. So if you actually are, at the point where you're going to kill yourself? Wouldn't it be nice to know that rather than, and here's the thing, when we think about things like suicidal ideation, we think that's dangerous. Suicidal ideation is not dangerous until you decide to act on it.
Mhm.
And you won't know how close that person is to acting on it until you start to have the conversation. So somebody says, and they won't come right out and say, "I'm thinking about killing myself," necessarily. They might say, life is not worth living anymore, or I've had so much problems in my life, I don't know if I want to still be here. So they're going to say something that is going to cue you that there is a possibility this person might be thinking of doing themselves in. And you say, "Oh, so tell me about what's going on with you that's so stressful that you think you don't want to be here." And just engage them in a conversation. And as you engage them in the conversation, what you're trying to find out is, have this person thought enough about it so that they have a plan in place. They say, "Well, if you're gonna kill yourself, how would you do it?" "Well, I really haven't thought about that." "That's good." Or "How are you going to do it?" "Well, I'm going to wait until everybody goes to sleep. I have my medication. I'm going to use all of my medication at one time, and because everybody is asleep, they won't know what's going on. They won't see me when I fall out." This is a person that has a plan, okay? And they have the method. They have the pills that they're already going to use. And so when do you think you might do that? "I think I'll do that within the next couple of days." You're on the phone to 911, okay? Because this is a person who is in imminent threat of doing harm to themselves. Now, the person might not be present with you, but if they tell you that they're going to do it right now, you want to try and stay with that person. And if possible, and somebody else is around, you call somebody and tell them, "Listen, call 911 and get them over here. We have a situation." And when they come, the experts take over and they know what to do.
Right.
But if you're not having that conversation with the people, they are likely to be in a place where they're going to do something and you don't know.
Most of all, to get professional help by skilled individuals is so important, because I know of a situation very close where the person had been saying for a while, and they had been giving many clues and said by the time they are of a certain age, that's what they were going to do. And unfortunately, they did just that. And I shared with the individuals, the next time someone says that, don't take it lightly. Make
Mhm.
sure that they get some help from certified professionals that can prayerfully turn it around. We have another question, and that is, you can see on the screen, other than telling people that they need to quit, this is in the form of the addictions,
Mhm.
what families can do to help someone who is addicted. And I think you shared that in several of your screens.
Yeah, I think what I would do to start off with that is to just if you can still have a civil conversation with the individual, just ask them, "So how is life going?" Most of these folks, they know that they're messed up, and as you start to have that conversation, they start to tell you, "Well, this is what's happening. This, I don't like this. I don't, this is, my life is messed up," in other words. And you say, "So is there something that you'd like to do about that?"
Mhm, mhm.
And
Great.
so there is a model out there called, it's a model of change. So the first part of this thing is what's called pre-contemplation.
Mhm,
So things are crossing their mind that they might like to change, and then they go into full contemplation of looking at what's going on in my life, and am I satisfied with what's going on in my life? And no, I'm not satisfied, and I'm sick and tired of ending up in the ditch, and ending up in pain and suffering, and I can't do that anymore. So when they begin to tell you what's going on with them, now you have a pathway to say, well, if you would like, I can help you with some of that.
Mhm.
And here's what I can do. I can take you over to such and such a place, let them talk to you, see if they can provide you with some counseling. Or next question, so what would you like me to do? How can I help you? And it's always about letting them stay in control.
Mhm. Right.
When you are dealing with people who you perceive as helpless, you
Mhm.
want to go in and rescue them.
Mhm.
You want to go in and say, oh, here's what I can do to help you. And taking control of that away from them is probably a lot of what's happened to them in their life, that people have taken control of their life. They feel out of control. They feel like they don't have a say, and you don't want to exacerbate that. So you're always looking at what can I do to keep you in control, and have a conversation about how I can help you move from where you are to a place you want to be while you remain in control of your life.
Good. Good. Would you say that counseling for the whole family, not only the addicted person, but the whole family, is good and is necessary?
Yes, oftentimes that's necessary. If I were going to do counseling in that arena, I would work with the addict first. I would get the person that's addicted to the place to where they can hear feedback that might be negative about who they are, and they're still able to stay regulated and not flip out and run out of the room.
Yes.
So
Real.
if you just bring them all into the room together, I promise you that first couple is going to be a disaster. At least that's been my experience. It'd be a disaster. I or I don't have the skills to do it that way.
Mhm.
There might be some people who do it that way. I don't have the skill to do that because it requires putting out multiple fires at the same time, and it requires uh, one of the this as a matter of fact, this happened to me yesterday. Um, the family gets together and they start to talk, and as they start to get deep, the conversation starts to speed up. Everybody now is trying to talk at once, and
Mhm.
not only is it speeding up, but the volume is going up, and you have to stop them and tell them, look at what's happening, and bring them back down.
Mhm.
And so in that situation, the people who, when they get into their emotions, it's difficult to get them to hold back. So, and in this case, we know that the person who's addicted, if they get into that space, they're going to go leave that meeting and they're going to go get high. So
Yes.
I want to make sure that I have that person in the space to where they can tolerate that kind of interaction and not immediately feel like I'm leaving here and I'm going to go get fired up.
Mhm.
So yes, it's a good thing and often necessary to do family counseling around addiction, but you have to stage it and manage how you're going to introduce the family.
And this is a last comment that we had. So appreciative of Sarah Lee in posting these questions, and very valid ones. How would you respond to this one? And I think you've answered it, but if you can elaborate further.
Separate the person from the addiction. I didn't never thought about it in that way. Let me think on that for a second. Um, there's a saying that I've come on recently that I think might address this. When people are in crisis, they tend to work the emotion. So what I'm trying to do is to get you to work the problem and
Mhm.
not the emotion.
Mhm.
So when the person is confronted with the fact that they're an addict,
Mhm.
and that's still causing them pain and suffering. You want to get them to the place to where they can start to at least face it. Even though there might be pain and suffering still there, they can face it without becoming so agitated that they want to leave the situation. So you're separating them from the addiction in the sense that you're separating from them from the intense emotion that prevents them from being able to handle a conversation about their addiction.
Yes, this is good. Early on in the session, you showed about the various addictive levels: cigarettes, the nicotine, the alcohol use, illicit drugs, and then we grow even further to stronger. And it's, I think, more of these types of webinars, seminars, and alike are important and necessary within the church, even down to how they have scientifically altered a lot of things that would ordinarily not be addictive initially, but it's kind of like a prerequisite in getting you hooked going forward. Even with some of the beverages, knowing how much additives or various addictive compounds are placed in some of the sodas, some of the beverages that we drink that look innocent, but really aren't. So it's good to be totally aware of various addictions, or I should say foods as well, prone to pose a problem.
So in that regard, one of the things that people should start to get adept at doing, excuse me,
Bless you.
is when you're buying these wine coolers or whatever that have small amounts of alcohol in it,
Mm-hmm.
what you want to be able to do is to convert the amount of alcohol. Your body can metabolize an ounce of alcohol per hour.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're drinking and you're drinking an ounce or less of alcohol per hour, you will not get drunk. But if you're going more than that, your body simply cannot process it. And as it cannot process it, it's building up the concentration of alcohol in your bloodstream to the point where, as now the legal limit is, you have 0.01 of alcohol in your bloodstream, you're legally drunk. So if the people are buying those things and using them, it would be good for them to recognize or start to convert. If I drink 1 can of this stuff, how much alcohol have I actually consumed? And then you can monitor and do what you need to do without end up being drunk and having to end up in court and so forth.
Mm-hmm. Here, let's see. Here's another question or comment. On your, I don't know what she's saying. There are apps you can download on your
Phone.
phone. Okay.
Yeah, I think she might be telling you that there are the information I just gave about how much alcohol you can consume and so forth, because the number is different for men and women.
Mm-hmm.
Women are supposed to be able to consume less alcohol than men in this course of, if I'm not mistaken, I believe the number is like recommended is like 5 ounces a week for a man. No, 7 ounces for a man and 5 ounces for a woman.
Mm-hmm.
So there are things out there on the internet that you can download that will give you quick access to that information.
Mm-hmm. Also, we have to be conscious of really understanding the chemistry that's involved. What is the addictive components that they put in a lot of the innocent drinks? I've recently become more aware of how, now I won't even say recently, but there's a red, blue, and silver can out there that I see a lot of individuals, especially among the church, really getting into that beverage. And I said, do you realize that that's very addictive? And some have said, yes, I realized that after I was just craving it. So just
Mhm.
understand that the enemy comes to kill, steal, and destroy in all kinds of forms. If they can't get you with a Budweiser, or I shouldn't even say the names, but a stronger beverage or alcohol, then they can do it subtly. So we just
Mhm.
should be cognizant of everything that we put or ingest in our temples. Um, I'm just excited about the next session, part 2, that you will be doing to this. And Dr. White, I'm just so grateful for what you have presented, because it is a huge need within our communities to be able to minister to all walks of lives that come into our churches, and to recognize that you mentioned the word holistic. It is a process. And I say that because when somebody comes in, we should be very sensitive and ask for God to lead us and guide us on how to minister to these individuals, especially, yes, they come up for prayer. Yes, they do make several attempts. But again, you must be skilled and certified to be able to know how to minister to them, to nurse them and nurture them back to health.
Mhm.
Uh, I look forward to you joining us again, because I can see this going into part 2, 3, 4, and 5. But if
Well,
you'd like,
part two is specifically what are the competencies that people in the clergy need for working with addiction. So that's the next stage. So what competencies should you have as a pastor or a church leader? Because as I said, likelihood just by statistics, the likelihood if you have a church of 100 people, there's likely as many as 25 of those people who have used substances or who might be struggling with addiction.
yes, yes. And we look forward to this is what the Lady D's Health and Wellness Center is all about. We have engaged quite a few certified, licensed, and credentialed professionals who are able to minister to you on how to be able to minister to your congregants, or uh, various programs that you may already have in place for your community. And I'm asking that the flyer for our next sessions be posted. If you can keep Dr. White up. Those of you who are listening and have appreciated this particular session, Dr. White's Zelle information is on the screen. And we also have the upcoming sessions are going to be August the 17th. We have It's a New Season, Good Grief. And we have Dr. White will be coming back to us on September the 7th. And it is very important that you stay tuned to hear him. Thank you, Jay. It's very important that you stay tuned and like and share. Jay, you can remove the post for me, please. Like and share us, and we look forward to offering uh, quite a few interesting and very good webinars. Live streams are coming forth. We're already working on our 2025 calendar, and I assure you, you will see Dr. White coming back again. Thank you so much. And if you could close us out with prayer, Dr. White, with a special emphasis for those who are yet struggling, to let them know that there is hope in recovery. God bless you.
Amen. Amen. Lord, we thank you for the time that we spent with you on today. Lord, I pray that the information has been delivered in a way that is useful. And I pray that there was someone who were listening today who we were able to help to understand the difficulties and the trials of working with addiction, either helping someone or going through it on their own. And Lord, we ask you now that as we leave from this place, that you will seal this word, that you would make sure that everyone who heard it will extract from it what they need in their lives. And we thank you, and we look forward to the next time that we are together as a group, and that we are going to continue to share life-giving and life-saving information to the children of God according to your word. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Thank you again to our audience. And if there's any thing that you see that you felt you would like for us to address or to present in future sessions, don't hesitate to let us know. All right. We thank you and God bless you. And we look forward to seeing you again. And if you liked what was presented, let us know that too. All right. Don't forget to like and share with a friend, especially someone that you care about who may be suffering with addictions. God bless you in Jesus' name.
Amen.
Amen.